All right, here we go. So notes for 1-3, the three integrative themes. Now, if you recall from earlier on, um, we had talked about there were sort of two things leading into um, the sustainable future. So, um, if you remember, we had the strategic themes and the integrative themes. The strategic themes were more like the ideas, kind of like the ideas and the concept part, and the integrative themes were more like sort of like the actions or putting the concepts into practice. And then those together lead to sustainable future. So now in this section, we are to the point of uh, the three integrative or the sort of like the action themes for this. So the three themes are ecosystem capital, policy and politics, and globalization. Ecosystem capital. So they give us a definition at the beginning here. The sum total value of all the goods and services provided by an ecosystem for human survival and use. So the more common things, like what are some things, what are some some ways that we get value out of our ecosystems? Yeah. Okay. Trees. Okay. So actually um I am gonna take that to a certain another. So it has to be something that we kind of get value from, right? But well, hold on. So let's take what you said a one step further. So there's stuff. Okay, so first step I said like trees where you can actually cut them down. We can get paper from it. You know, wood, build houses, all that kind of stuff, right? Like an actual tangible resource that way. Now, sunshine or whatever, like you could look at it in terms of we get energy from the sun, right? Yeah, like solar panels and just the sun gives us energy. That's one way. But also the concept of like of it making us feel better and stuff like that. Take it a little bit further and just think about the value we get from certain environments just because they exist. So, for example, think about like national like parks, like something like the Grand Canyon or something. We actually get value from that from just its existence, from how sort of unique and interesting and kind of cool it is, right? Like they actually um there's actually value, and then you can actually get other value off of it, you know, selling merchandise, using it to fund, you know, park restoration for like entrance fees, stuff like that. So there is value to environments that isn't necessarily something physical that we take out of it. It can be from the use as well. um, so so that's another part. Another good example of this, because sometimes we tend to forget those things. Another good example is, so think of if you've ever like jet skied or tubed or went boating or water skiing or snow skiing or four wheeling or any stuff like that, any kind of like outdoor activities. We're getting value from the environment, from the experience that we have with whatever activity we're doing. Like we're not necessarily taking something out of the environment, but we still place value on that. And actually, if you think about it, there's some places that their whole business is that, right? Um, you've got ski slopes and ski lodge areas and whatever. You know, you've got places that will charge, um, you know, you charge like licensing fees for like jet skis and places that do rental of equipment for activity equipment and stuff like that. So yes, we get a lot of value from stuff we take from the environment, like trees or like crops that we grow and then use and stuff like that. But there's also value in stuff that we don't necessarily take. There's a lot of value. Think of it as kind of like, you know, tourist or nature activity value too. So that all of that gets counted into that ecosystem capital. Okay. Um, so a couple of points with the ecosystem capital stuff. Everything that we as humans need to survive is provided one way or another from our natural environment. Even man-made substances usually get their raw materials from the environment. So even something like plastic, which is a man-made material, it still comes from um, resources from the environment. Okay, and then part of this theme, taking care of our natural environment and using resources in such a way that we will be able to continue the current manner of life indefinitely should be the goal of this theme. So essentially, again, leading to sustainability, right? Using our natural environment and taking care of it in a way that we can continue to use it in the future is the goal of this ecosystem capital idea. Okay. All right. Second one, policy and politics. So they say policy and politics are human decisions that determines what happens to the natural world and the political processes that lead to those decisions. And then the second bullet point, creating laws and policies that both protect the health of the environment as well as allow appropriate human use. So can you guys think of any examples of laws or policies that deal with the environment? Good. Yeah, for in industries, industrial use like emissions limits, basically how much pollution they're limited to being able to kick off, right? What else? Any others you guys can think of? Yeah, good. From so if you guys remember from your American history, Teddy Roosevelt was, I think, wasn't it him that did the National Parks Act and stuff? Oh, one of the ones there. It could, I mean, it could be part of the reason. It probably is Roosevelt then, if he's one of the ones on it. Um, yeah, so like creating the national park system and protection of that kind of stuff. Um, any others you guys can think of uh, in terms of? Okay, yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah, so funding for so it might necessarily like yeah, there's laws, but there's also policies that create like funding for certain things like wildlife rescue and sanctuary areas. The DNR, Department of Natural Resources, uh, so that kind of stuff. Um, uh, so like anti-poaching and endangered species laws would be under policy and politics. Um, so even on a broader level, things that talk about like resource use. So um, if you think about something like the energy consumption limits and laws and stuff, I think we talked about early on this year, early on, a couple weeks ago, we talked about like energy efficiency in cars, right? So I think there's some kind of like policy or mandate that says like cars need to be able to have a certain mile per gallon by like I don't know, by like 2025, 2030, something like that. I think there's a we can actually look it up. I think it's like 40 miles per gallon or something. I don't know. Let me see. Um, uh, let's see if I can find. It says in 2020, the EPA and NHTSA issued the Safer, Affordable, Fuel Efficient Vehicles Rule, which required automakers to improve fuel efficiency 1.5% annually from model years 2021 through 2026. So um, it says the rule was less stringent than the Obama era rule that it replaced. That rule would have required automakers to improve fuel efficiency 5% annually for model year 2020 through 2025, reaching 46.7 miles per gallon by 2025. So, so they kind of like downgraded it, but it's still stuff like that would be another that would be an example of a law or a policy in place uh, for that kind of thing. Okay, so we've given several examples now. You guys get the idea, I think, by this point. The and this is in bold. The main purpose of public environmental policy is to promote the common good. Now, what does that mean? The common good. What's that? Yeah, like what is that? What does it mean by like promote the common good? Yeah. Good. Okay, so do what's good for everyone, not necessarily what everyone wants, or not necessarily what the majority want, but sort of the overall most good for the most people type of thing. Um, that's that's the purpose of public environmental policy, the main purpose. Okay. All right. Any questions about policy and politics? So again, this is about how we go about actually putting into action some of these things that we decide as a society are important to us, are the morals and ethics parts of it, right? Okay, globalization. Definition for globalization: the accelerating interconnectedness of human activities, ideas, and cultures around the globe. Um, so we talked about this a little bit before about how you guys, just as a generation, you guys have access to more information than any other generations previously in the past. More information and more information faster. So this is sort of the result of globalization. Accelerating meaning happening faster and faster. Interconnectedness just means everything becoming connected, human activities, ideas, and cultures. So how does this impact environmental issues? Well, most environmental issues are no longer localized or even limited to specific nations. Most issues have global impact. So this is a big deal because as everything becomes more interconnected, that means that these issues have sort of ripple effects. Okay. One example is, hold on, let me see if I can pull it up real quickly here. Maybe. Um, so this is an article from 2019. China instituted a not a full ban, um, but a ban on kind of like the type and how much um, what's the word I want to use? How much contamination the recycling material that is sent to them can have in it. Uh, it says China's decision to no longer be the dumping ground for the world's recycled waste has left municipalities and waste companies from Australia to the United States scrambling for alternatives. But experts say it offers an opportunity to develop better solutions for a growing throwaway culture. So, um, so sometime in 2018, China uh, essentially shut down the industry's biggest market. It banned the import of most plastics and other materials headed for that nation's recycling processors, which handle nearly half the world's recyclable waste for the past quarter century. The move was an effort to halt a deluge of soiled and contaminated materials that was overwhelming China's processing facilities and leaving the country with yet another environmental problem, and this one not of its own making. So basically, what was happening was China handled um, almost half of the world's recyclable waste in processing facilities and stuff like that. But their standards for the how contaminated the recycled waste was that it came in were really low. So basically they were getting a bunch of recycling, quote unquote, recycling stuff that was crap that basically they had to throw away or couldn't use because it wasn't um, the standard for it to be recycled wasn't high enough. It was contaminated with other stuff. So um, just to give you an idea, for example, if you have a pizza box, if it has grease in it from the pizza, even if you clean all the like food particles and stuff in, you can't recycle it because the grease that's in the box, it literally um, it contaminates the cardboard, but it causes a breakdown of the actual cardboard in the recycling process. And if you put that in, then that can literally contaminate whole other batches of recycling. So, so there's certain things like contaminants and stuff that can make it unable to recycle. And basically, China was getting all this stuff that was contaminated with things that made it impossible to recycle certain stuff. So they started banning um, a big majority of the intake. Um, it said mainly plastics and mixed paper were the main things. The metals and stuff aren't as big of a deal because they're easier to recycle and to clean off uh, contaminated parts with. But yeah, so that's an example of how this globalization idea, it's not linked to just a specific nation. Like other nations' policies are having global impacts. And in addition, the way in which global economies are linked together now means that almost no country will have large scale environmental issues that do not impact many other countries. Uh, because the economies are linked worldwide so much that if something is negatively affecting one country, it'll probably have a ripple effect in other countries. Right? Any questions or comments on any of those? The globalization stuff? Does that make sense? At least the idea of how, so it's not just about one country anymore because of how interconnected everything is. You get to give it almost, I think of it almost like a spider web, like you pull on one little part and it reverberates out throughout the whole web. That's kind of like globalization. And one thing happens in one part and it reverberates out through the entire global economy and has global impacts. So okay, so those three things together are sort of the areas in which the ideas of sustainability are like the kind of like the actions that they're filtered through. And these are the areas in which we have to kind of take action and consider things in order to have a sustainable future. Okay. Um, Risks of losing biodiversity. So this is a little separate, but it's part of the sustainable future stuff. So a lot of people think about like, well, why does it matter if why does it matter if some lizard in the rainforest in South America goes extinct? Like, why should I really care? Why does that have a big impact on me, or why does it even matter? Okay. Um, and my answer to that in general is, if one thing does, it probably doesn't have any kind of impact on you. It's not going to affect your life one way or the other. But when you have, when we start to have a more rapid loss of biodiversity, multiple species, and don't forget, we're not talking just animals, we're talking plants as well, plant and animal species. And when we increase the rate of loss of biodiversity, then it starts having a measurable impact. So here are some of the risks or consequences, however you want to think about it, of losing biodiversity. Okay, so first, let's talk about this. Do we understand what biodiversity means? The prefix bio means, anybody know what the prefix bio means? That's bi. Bio, yep, means life. So bio, the bio part refers to life. And diversity, what does diversity refer to? Yeah, like differences. Um, Differences or a variety. So think of biodiversity as being sort of like a variety of different life. So it's having different species, both plant, animal, fungi. Um, so why does it matter that why is it important that we have as many as possible different living things? So one of the consequences of losing it or risk is it's that biodiversity is critical to the health of ecosystems. The more biodiversity present, the healthier and hardier an ecosystem is. Can anybody think of why that might be true? Why does more biodiversity typically mean is better for an ecosystem? Yeah, good. More there to work with. That's a good way to put it pretty simply. There's more stuff there to work with. So it's kind of like having it's like having more choices or having like backup options or stuff. If you've got a a larger biodiversity, plant and animal and bacteria, stuff like that, if one thing goes away or if the population of one thing drops, the more biodiversity there is, the more choices other living things still have to eat and to use and whatever. But the smaller amount there is, the more likely it is for a loss or a drop in a population of one thing is to affect all the others if there's fewer choices. Does that make sense? Somewhat? Okay. So, second consequent or risk up there, biodiversity gives human more resources to use for living. Some examples: medicines developed from plants and animals. The more there are, the more likely we will be able to find cures for various diseases. So, um, all of our like almost all of our medicines, well, everything is at some point derived from nature and from plants, but um, almost all of our medicines come from something that was first discovered in nature. uh, so take aspirin for example. Anybody know where aspirin came from? Yeah, from anybody know what plant? So um hold on, I'm trying to pull it up here. Okay, so basically as far back as um 3000 to 1500 BC, willow willow bark and like willow tree and willow bark extract were used um, as an anti-inflammatory or pain reliever for non-specific aches and pains. Um, so even as far back as like the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians, they were using willow bark and um, boiling it or making like what we call a pulture, like kind of like mashing it up and mashing it up into kind of like a paste and stuff, and using it as an anti-inflammatory pain reliever. So um, there's a substance in willow bark that's called salicylic acid, and that actually is the component that they um, found was a painkiller and anti-inflammatory, and eventually that was through research and study and development turned into aspirin. It's used in aspirin. So that's just one example of something from our environment that that was developed. And there's a ton of stuff. Like almost everything that you can think of was derived at some point from an ingredient found in nature. Okay, and the more biodiversity there is, the more chances that there'll be something out there in nature that we can use for a cure for something. Okay. Uh, Using animals and plants for food, the more there are, the more varied our diet can be, which is typically healthier for us. Having a varied diet gives us, a lot of different nutrients, minerals, proteins, all that kind of stuff. The more varied our diet is, typically, it's typically healthier for us. Okay. So those are just two examples of um, a consequence of losing biodiversity it can affect those aspects of human life using biodiversity as resources. The third thing, and there's more than just three, these are the three main ones I have listed, but is aesthetic or moral value. Aesthetic is just like how something looks or how we think about something. So the aesthetic or moral value. The value we gain from the existence of a large variety of animals and plants. So the example I have here is zoos. Zoos zoos exist because of a wide diversity of animals. Nobody's going to want to go to a zoo that has like three cats, a couple of dogs, a horse, and maybe a pig. Like, yay! Okay, like that's not a zoo that anybody wants to go to. A zoo of sadness. Um, so like what the whole point of a zoo, the reason the zoos exist is because you get to go there and you get to see a bunch of different animals, stuff that you might not normally get to see, and a wide variety. So literally the value of that comes in the fact that they exist. Okay. Or places like botanical gardens or arboretums, like Morton Arboretum, like that literally exists because there's a wide variety of plants, and people like to go there and look at a wide variety of plants and stuff like that. Okay. All right. Any questions off that part? All right. So we are finished with that.